Picture this. A 9-year-old girl standing in the freezing autumn night, her breath forming small clouds in the darkness. In her jacket pocket, a folded piece of notebook paper. On that paper, 7 words written with shaking hands. 7 words that would change everything. What could a child possibly write that would save a life? This is the story of Aria Lindell, and the note that broke the silence. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed something terribly wrong, but felt too powerless to stop it? Maybe you saw someone hurting, someone hiding pain behind closed doors, and you didn't know what to do. It happens in quiet neighborhoods, just like yours. Behind white picket fences and manicured lawns, some families are drowning in secrets. Now, imagine you're 9 years old. What would you do if you saw your mother in danger? If this story moves you, stick with me until the end, and let me know in the comments if you've ever found courage in an impossible moment. Autumn in Ohio can be beautiful. The leaves turn copper and gold, and small-town neighborhoods hum with the comfort of routine. Aria Lindell Street looked like something from a postcard. Neat houses, friendly neighbors, the smell of Mrs. Callahan's bakery drifting through the crisp air every morning. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, but inside the Lindell home, something was breaking apart. Aria had learned to read the signs before she even understood what they meant. The way her mother, Claire, wore long sleeves even on warm days. The slight tremor in her hands when she set the dinner table, like she was bracing for something to shatter. The forced brightness in her voice when she asked Aria about school, as if normalcy could be willed into existence through cheerful questions about spelling tests and recess. Her father hadn't always been this way. Aria remembered fragments of a different time, him lifting her onto his shoulders, his laugh echoing through the backyard, the smell of sawdust on his work clothes after long days in construction. But that version of him had faded over the past year, replaced by someone Aria barely recognized. The addiction came quietly at first, then louder. Pills for back pain became pills for everything. His eyes grew distant, his temper unpredictable. Some nights he was a ghost, barely present. Other nights, he was a storm. Aria developed survival instincts she shouldn't have needed. She learned to disappear into her room at the first sign of tension, clutching her favorite doll like a talisman. She perfected the art of silence, how to walk without making the floorboards creak, how to become invisible in her own home. She became an expert at pretending everything was fine, because that's what her mother did, and if Mom could be brave, so could she. But pretending doesn't make the truth go away. She saw the bruises her mother tried to hide beneath makeup and carefully chosen clothing. She heard the whispered phone calls that ended abruptly when Aria entered the room. She felt the weight of secrets pressing down on their small family, suffocating them all. And nobody talked about it. Not really. The neighbors waved from their porches. Teachers smiled at parent conferences. The world kept turning as if nothing was wrong, because that's what happens when pain stays hidden behind closed doors. Aria was 9 years old, carrying the kind of burden that breaks adults. The evening of October 17 started like so many others, with tension thick enough to choke on. Aria sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, her doll positioned carefully in her lap. Down the hall, she could hear her parents' voices. At first, they were just murmurs, the kind of low conversation that might have been about bills or groceries or anything ordinary. But Aria knew better. She learned to detect the subtle shift in tone that meant danger was coming. The murmurs became sharp words. Sharp words became shouts. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands gripped the doll tighter, knuckles white, as if holding on to something soft could protect her from what was happening down the hall. She wanted to cover her ears, to disappear into one of the stories she loved to read, where heroes always won and families were safe. But this wasn't a story. This was real. She heard her mother's voice, pleading, frightened. She heard her father's rage, that terrible sound she'd come to dread. Then came the crash. Something breaking. Her mother's cry. Aria's whole body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, stay quiet, stay small. That's what she'd always done before. But this time felt different. This time, the violence had a finality to it that made her blood run cold. Her mother's sobs filtered through the walls. And something inside Arya, some deep, primal part of her that loved her mother more than she feared her father, made a decision. She couldn't stop what was happening with her hands. She couldn't physically stand between them. But maybe, just maybe, she could do something else. Her father's heavy footsteps stormed toward the front door. It slammed. Through her window, she watched him pace in the driveway, cigarette smoke curling into the night air. This was her chance. Her only chance. Arya's hands trembled as she pulled open her small desk drawer. Inside was a worn notebook, the cheap kind with blue lines and cardboard covers that schools hand out at the beginning of a year. She tore out a single sheet, the sound impossibly loud in her quiet room. She stared at the blank page. What do you say when you need to save someone? How do you fit terror and love and desperation into words when you're 9 years old and your spelling still isn't perfect? She picked up her pencil. The tip hovered over the paper. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her heart still racing from the sound she'd heard. Outside, her father paced. Inside, her mother was crying. Arya wrote. The letters came out shaky, uneven, some bigger than others. Please save my mother from my dad's punches. 7 words. Simple, direct, raw. She didn't elaborate. She didn't explain. She didn't even sign her name. Because what else was there to say? Children shouldn't have to explain why violence is wrong. They shouldn't have to build a case for why someone deserves to be safe. She folded the note carefully, her small fingers creasing the paper into a tight square. Then she tucked it deep into her jacket pocket. Think about the last time you had to choose between your own safety and doing what's right. That moment when your heart tells you to act, but your mind screams at you to stay quiet. That's where Arya was. 9 years old, terrified, but moving forward anyway. What gave her that kind of strength? Drop a comment if this reminds you of a moment when you found courage you didn't know you had. And hit that like button. Stories like this need to be shared. Arya slipped her jacket on with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She could still hear her mother in the kitchen, trying to compose herself, probably wiping away tears and attempting to clean up whatever had broken. Her father was still outside, his silhouette visible through the front window. She moved quietly to the back door. The October air hit her face like ice water, shocking and sharp. She hadn't grabbed a hat or gloves. She wasn't thinking about being cold. She was thinking about the note in her pocket and the woman in the kitchen who needed someone, anyone, to help. The bakery was 3 blocks away. In daylight. It was an easy walk, the kind Arya made without thinking. But at night, with fear clawing at her chest and the weight of what she was doing pressing down on her shoulders, those 3 blocks felt infinite. Her sneakers made soft sounds against the pavement. Streetlights cast long shadows. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant fear, and fear might make her turn around. Mrs. Callahan's bakery sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. During the day, its windows glowed warm and golden, displaying perfect rows of pastries and bread. Mrs. Callahan always waved when Arya walked past on her way to school. She had kind eyes and flour perpetually dusted on her apron. She was safe. Arya approached the darkened storefront. The closed sign hung in the window. For a terrible moment, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. What if Mrs. Callahan didn't come to the bakery until late morning? What if no one found a note for hours? But she had no other plan, no other safe person, no other way. She knelt down in front of the door. Her fingers, numb from cold and fear, pulled the folded note from her pocket. She stared at it one last time, this small, wrinkled square of paper that held everything she couldn't say out loud. Then she slid it under the door. It disappeared into the darkness beyond, swallowed by the gap between threshold and floor. It was done. She'd spoken in the only way she knew how. Arya walked home through streets that felt emptier than before. She didn't know if her message would reach anyone in time. She didn't know if it would even be found. All she knew was that she'd tried, and sometimes trying is the bravest thing a child can do. Mrs. Callahan arrived at her bakery at 5:30 a.m., the same time she had for the past 20 years. The pre-dawn darkness was familiar to her. She'd learned to love these quiet hours when the world was still asleep and her kitchen became a place of creation. Coffee brewing, ovens preheating, the therapeutic rhythm of kneading dough. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and flipped on the lights. That's when she saw it. A small piece of notebook paper, folded into a square, lying just inside the entrance. She almost missed it, almost stepped right over it on her way to the back kitchen. But something made her pause, made her bend down and pick it up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was simply the universe ensuring that a child's cry for help didn't go unheard. She unfolded the note. Her breath caught. Her hand flew to her mouth. The letters were wobbly, written by a child's hand, but the message was devastatingly clear. Please save my mother from my dad's punches. Mrs. Callahan's mind raced. She knew the families in this neighborhood. She knew Aria, the quiet girl with dark hair who always looked too serious for someone so young. She knew the Lindell house, just a few blocks away. She didn't hesitate. She didn't question whether the note was real or wonder if she was overreacting. She reached for her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. I need police to 47 Willow Street immediately, she said, her voice urgent. A child left a note saying her father is hurting her mother. Please, you need to go now. 8 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up to the Lindell home. Officers knocked firmly on the door. When no one answered immediately, they knocked again, louder, more insistent. Claire Lindell opened the door, and the officers immediately understood why they'd been called. Fresh bruises darkened her face. Her lip was split. Her eyes were red from crying, wide with fear and confusion about why police were at her door. Ma'am, we received a report of domestic violence at this address. The lead officer said gently. Are you okay? Is someone hurting you? For a moment, Claire looked like she might deny it, might say everything was fine, might send them away like she'd been doing for months. But something in the officer's expression, concern, not judgment, broke through her defenses. He's in the bedroom, she whispered. Please, my daughter. Where's your daughter now? At school. Claire lied instinctively, then stopped. No, she's home. Upstairs. They found Ari in her room, still in yesterday's clothes, having never changed for bed. She looked up at the officers with those 2 old eyes, holding her doll, and simply asked, Is my mom okay? This moment right here, this is exactly why we share these stories. Because somewhere, someone watching this might be Aria, or Claire, or even Mrs. Callahan, wondering if they should get involved. If this story is hitting you, I need you to hit that subscribe button. The next story we tell might be the one that saves someone you love. Let's build a community that doesn't look away. Aria's father was arrested that morning. The charges were substantial: domestic violence, assault, child endangerment. The system that had failed to see what was happening in the Lindell home could no longer ignore it. For Ari and Claire, the days that followed were a blur of police statements, medical examinations, victim services, and terrifying relief. Relief that the immediate danger had ended. Terror about what came next. They stayed with Claire's sister across town while the legal proceedings unfolded. Slowly, painfully, they began to heal. Claire's bruises faded. The tremor in her hands eventually stopped. Therapy sessions taught them both how to live without constant fear. But the ripples of that night, of one child's note slipped under a bakery door, extended far beyond one family. News spread to the small Ohio town, at first in whispers, then in concerned conversations at community meetings. A 9-year-old had saved her mother's life by writing a note. A 9-year-old had been brave enough to break the silence when all the adults around her had looked away. People were shaken. Neighbors admitted they'd heard arguments, but convinced themselves it wasn't their business. Teachers acknowledged they'd seen warning signs, but didn't want to assume. The collective guilt was heavy, but it sparked something important. Change. Recovery isn't linear. It doesn't happen in convenient time frames or follow predictable patterns. For Claire and Aria, healing meant learning to breathe without waiting for danger. It meant rebuilding trust in people, in safety, in the possibility of happiness. Claire attended support groups for domestic violence survivors. She sat in circles with other women who understood the particular shame and fear that comes with abuse, who knew what it meant to love someone and be terrified of them simultaneously. She learned that leaving, even with help, was one of the bravest things she'd ever done. Aria went to therapy designed for children who'd witnessed trauma. She drew pictures, played games that helped her process what she'd experienced, and slowly began to understand that none of it had been her fault. The therapist told her she was a hero. Aria didn't feel like one. She just felt like a kid who wanted her mom to be safe. But together, they rebuilt. Claire got a job at the local library. They moved into a small apartment with windows that let in morning sunlight. They established routines that felt safe and predictable. Pancakes on Saturdays, movie nights with popcorn, the simple, beautiful ordinariness of a life without violence. And through it all, mother and daughter held on to each other. The bond between them had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger. Aria learned that her mother was resilient beyond measure. Claire learned that her daughter had a core steel wrapped in compassion. Meanwhile, the town was transforming its collective shame into action. The school board implemented a comprehensive program teaching children about domestic violence and safe ways to ask for help. They created simple protocols. If you're in danger, tell a teacher. Write a note. Use a code word. They made sure every child knew that speaking up wasn't betrayal. It was survival. Local police partner with counselors to train officers in recognizing signs of domestic abuse, especially in households with children. They established clearer pathways for intervention, making it easier for neighbors, teachers, or concerned citizens to report suspicions without fear of repercussion. Mrs. Callahan's Bakery became an official safe space, one of several businesses throughout town that displayed a small symbol in their window indicating they were trained to help anyone in crisis, especially children. Mrs. Callahan herself became an advocate, speaking at community events about the importance of paying attention, of being someone a child could trust. The note itself, Aria's original, wrinkled piece of notebook paper with its shaky handwriting, was photocopied and used in training materials. Not to exploit Aria's pain, but to remind people what courage looks like. It looks like a 9-year-old handwriting. It looks like 7 simple words. It looks like refusing to stay silent when silence means death. Other families came forward. Women who'd been hiding their own abuse found strength in Aria's story. Children learned they could ask for help. The culture of silence that had allowed violence to thrive began to crack. One note changed everything. 15 years have passed since that October night. Aria Lindell is now 24 years old, and she's chosen a path that surprises no one who knows her story. She's a counselor specializing in helping children who experience domestic violence. Her office is warm and welcoming, filled with art supplies, comfortable chairs, and toys that help traumatized kids express what words often can't capture. On her wall, in a simple frame, hangs a copy of that note she wrote at 9 years old. When children come to her, scared, confused, carrying secrets too heavy for their small shoulders, she tells them her story, not to center herself, but to show them they're not alone. She tells them that courage doesn't require you to be big or strong or fearless. Sometimes courage is just refusing to give up even when you're terrified. She teaches them practical skills, how to identify safe adults, how to create safety plans, how to use their voices when speaking feels impossible. She tells them that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Her mother, Claire, is proud beyond words. She's remarried now to a gentleman who treats her with respect and kindness. She volunteers at the same women's shelter that helped her years ago, paying forward the support she received. When people ask about her daughter, her eyes light up. She's saving lives, Claire says simply, just like she saved mine. Here's what Aria's story teaches us. Courage doesn't always announce itself with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's a folded piece of paper slipped under a door in the darkness. We live in a world that celebrates big, dramatic acts of heroism. The stranger who runs into burning buildings, the person who stands up to injustice in front of crowds. And those acts are heroic. But we can't forget about the quiet courage that happens in small moments, in secret decisions, in the choice to speak when staying silent will be safer. Aria was 9 years old. She couldn't physically stop her father. She couldn't change the situation with her hands. But she had a voice, even if that voice was written in shaky handwriting on notebook paper. And she used it. That's the power available to all of us, regardless of age or size or strength. We all have voices. We all have the ability to break silence. We all have the choice to act, even when action feels impossibly hard. And for those of us who aren't in crisis, for those who are safe, we carry a different responsibility. We need to be like Mrs. Callahan. We need to pay attention. We need to create spaces where people in pain can reach out without fear. We need to listen when someone finally finds the courage to speak. Because here's the truth. Domestic violence thrives in silence. It depends on victims feeling isolated, powerless, convinced that no one will believe them or help them. Every time we look away, every time we convince ourselves it's not our business, every time we ignore the signs because intervention feels uncomfortable, we become complicit in that silence. But every time we listen, every time we act, every time we create pathways for people to ask for help, we break that silence. We become part of the solution. Aria's note saved her mother's life. But the ripples of that note save countless others by proving that speaking up matters, that one voice can start movement, that children deserve to be heard and protected. Sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest courage, and sometimes the quietest voices change everything. So let me ask you, have you ever been afraid to speak up about something that mattered? Or maybe you've been on the other side, the person who listened when someone found the courage to reach out? Your story matters. Your experience might give someone else the strength they need to act. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time you witnessed quiet courage or found bravery in an unexpected moment. Let's build a community that doesn't look away from hard truths. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Earthly Tales because every story we tell here carries a lesson worth learning. Lessons about courage, compassion, resilience, and what it means to be human in a complicated world. And hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your perspective or maybe even save a life. Remember, we all have the power to be someone's Mrs. Callahan. We all can be the safe person, the one who pays attention, the one who acts when others look away. And we all have the power to be like Aria, to find our voice even when we're terrified, to speak even when staying silent would be easier. Because sometimes the smallest actions carry the greatest weight. Sometimes a folded piece of paper changes everything. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to let suffering stay hidden in the dark. This is Earthly Tales, where every story teaches us something about the strength of a human spirit. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest courage. Until next time, keep finding your voice. Keep being brave. Keep being the person someone else can reach out to in their darkest moment. The world needs more people like Aria. The world needs more people like you.